It's being called fast-track deportation.
Starting tomorrow, the Trump administration will expand an immigration policy nationwide, a move that some are calling extreme. News 8's Amanda Shotsky is live downtown with what it means. Amanda?
Well, the expedited removal process is being touted from the Trump administration as something that is necessary to deal with an influx of migrants at our borders. And starting tomorrow, it won't just apply to border cities like here in San Diego, but across the country. We spoke to an immigration attorney who says this is all shocking and could even have an effect on U.S. citizens.
This is a story that doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but it really is.
The story is the quick deportation process announced by the Trump administration. San Diego immigration attorney Andrew Nietor calls it extreme.
Really what the administration is doing is almost removing the immigration judges and the immigration courts from the process.
It's called expedited removal. Right now, immigration officials can speed up deportations of people apprehended within 100 miles of the border. But starting Tuesday, that policy will be expanded nationwide. Anyone apprehended will have to show proof that they've been living in the country for at least 2 years. Nietor says this could pose a problem even for U.S. citizens.
I don't know what ICE officers think the average person walks around with in their wallet, but I certainly don't walk around with proof that I've been living in the United States for the last 2 years.
They have to go out.
This is just the latest in what the White House calls necessary moves to crack down on immigrants coming into the country. In recent weeks, pushing to change asylum laws and threatening widespread ICE raids. This morning, San Diego Border Patrol tweeting these photos of 15 people arrested over the weekend for trying to enter the U.S. illegally by boat. But when it comes to the expedited removal process, some argue that there has to be a better way.
But if this administration did want to address the increasing number of migrants that are coming to this country, most of whom have legitimate reasons for coming, they would put the resources in place and provide people the opportunity to make their case.
And the Department of Homeland Security says this expedited process will also help mitigate a backlog of about 900,000 immigration cases that are currently pending. The immigration attorney that we spoke to said anyone who is concerned with their well-being should carry proof of residence with them at all times. Back to you.
Thanks, Amanda.